when we hurdle in our hurdle practices and we're trying to have the proper distance away from the initial hurdle on our approach to the first hurdle, a lot of times during the practice, we talk about taking 3 hard or 4 hard driving steps and then stand up. So what I do is I give them an audible cue after I start them at the point they're supposed to stand up, I simply yell stand up. And we're going to demonstrate that right now. And what I'm hoping for is that as I do this in practice, it becomes ingrained to the fact where they're at the meet and they're actually racing, they don't have to think about it anymore. They know they've taken those steps, it's time to stand up and find that hurdle. Set. Stand up. Set. Stand up. All right, what I'm doing now is I'm giving myself a coaching mark so I can see where they take off in reference to the hurdle. One of the most common problems in hurdling is being too close to the hurdle. And what that does, it gets it so that your center of mass has to raise high and get you too high over the hurdle. And what we actually want to happen is the center of mass to be at its highest point behind the hurdle, and as the athlete hurdles, it drops down to the ground to the hurdle. So we're trying to create a high point out here, not here. And the reason for that is we're trying to get on the other side of the hurdle on the ground as fast as we can so we can start our sprinting process again. So everything I do to determine that is based upon an individual athlete on how far away from the hurdle they should be. Now, in reference to height of a hurdler, everybody talks about a high hurdle, a tall hurdler, short hurdler. Well, in essence, a tall hurdler actually needs to be closer to the hurdle than a short hurdler does. And that's because the center of mass on that tall hurdler is already higher. So you can imagine if his center of mass is here, he's almost dropping into the hurdle here, whereas a shorter hurdler is down here. He may actually have to raise his mass a little bit, which means he needs to be farther away from the hurdle. And that's simply because the center of mass follows what's called a parabolic curve, which means once it leaves the ground, there's no changing it. It's going to follow a path that's pre-prescribed by gravity, basically. So you can't change your path once you leave the ground, so you need to make it correct off the ground. So all we do for that, we don't even use the blocks. We start back a little bit, we run into it. I actually try to have them see the mark, hurdle from the mark, and then we adjust it per individual. So we're going to show you how we do that right now. So I've used a mark of 6 feet to start this, and we're going to go ahead and move these guys and dial them in according to where they need to be. Okay, now as you can see, both of those guys were inside this mark. Now what I generally would do is I'd have a video camera and I would videotape this. I would slow-mo it back to myself and I'd try to determine if they're actually coming down over the hurdle. Now I know these guys are pretty good hurdlers. I know for the most part they do that every single time they hurdle. So the tape mark is again just a reference. You have to move it according to each athlete. And again, they're not quite going full speed today in this drill, so it's hard to tell exactly where they'd be, but that was a good starting point and a good way to show you guys how to determine where to take off at the first hurdle.